also the beliefs inherent in the identity of Indonesia as a multicultural archipelagic country. Indonesian International Islamic University is the first international Islamic university in Indonesia that not only explores Islamic studies, but also introduces to the world an advanced Islamic civilization in Indonesia that is able to make a positive contribution through discovery, research, and global achievement.
Do you need high quality of international education right here in Indonesia? The place is at the Indonesian International Islamic University, or we call it IIIU. IIIU has 4 faculties. One of them is the Faculty of Education. The Faculty of Education offers MA and PhD in education with 4 concentrations. First, curriculum teaching and learning. Second, educational assessment and evaluation. Third, education policy management and leadership. And 4, education and society. The 4 concentrations are designed to represent the ecological system, namely those that focus on the micro context, represented by the concentration of curriculum, teaching and learning, the meso context, represented by the concentration of educational assessment and evaluation, and the concentration of education policy management and leadership, while the concentration of education and society represent the context of a larger meso layer, linking it with the macro lenses of economics, politics, anthropology, and sociology of education.
And here, we are at the Faculty of Education, one of the faculty at IIIU designed to produce high-quality transformative educators with a passion for lifelong learning. Our dedication to excellence and innovation sets us apart from the rest, and we are proud to be leading the way toward a brighter future for education.
The IIIU Faculty of Education offers a Master of Arts in Education program that prepares graduates for careers as academics, practitioners, designers, researchers, government officials, managers, supervisors, assessment specialists, evaluators, policy analysts, and consultants at national and international institutions. The program provides a comprehensive foundation in education covering theories, philosophies, practices, and their connection to society and culture. Graduates are equipped with the skill and knowledge necessary to succeed in education. The IIIU Faculty of Education is committed to providing students with a supportive and inclusive community. Our faculty comprises experts dedicated to helping students achieve their academic and professional goals. With resources and support available at IIIU, students have the opportunity to thrive and succeed in their chosen careers in the education sector.
The Faculty of Education is filled with experts and globally recognized lecturers who are able to share their passion, story, journey, and perspective with like-minded students.
Our PhD program is designed for students who are passionate about education and want to make a significant contribution to the field. Our faculty members are experts in their respective areas of research, and our program provides students with the analytical tools and resources they need to conduct groundbreaking research and participate in global discussion. Our application process is highly competitive, but we encourage all qualified students to apply. You can visit our website for more information on the application requirements and deadlines. Let's make your dream come true with study in the PhD program at the Faculty of Education, Universitas Islam Internasional Indonesia.
The Faculty of Education at Indonesian International Islamic University is designed to produce scholars, researchers, and experts in education who understand the scientific foundation of education holistically, with a comparative insight into the philosophy and the practice of Western, Islamic, and Indonesian education. Students at the Faculty of Education are encouraged to explore complex educational problems and come up with innovative solutions.
On more than 140 hectares of land, Indonesian International Islamic University has built dozens of facilities to ensure a seamless experience and also a balance between academic activities and non-academic activities. Indonesian International Islamic University will always support the positive development and freedom of each individual, especially those related to physical, mental, and spiritual development.
One among the reasons to establish this university is how to introduce Indonesia to the world. Indonesia is a very rich country in terms of cultural diversity, religious diversity, and also experiences in developing democracy hand in hand with the Islamic development. Instead of sending study abroad to many foreign countries, now we invite students, lecturers, intellectuals come to Indonesia, and this university become an intellectual hub, and I'm sure within a short time Indonesia will get global recognition since we have qualified lecturers, qualified students, and we have a clear plan how to make this university getting international standard.
At IIIU, we will learn more, gain more, and give even more as we believe. Lesson shapes souls. Come and join us to shape the souls and create the future. Welcome to Indonesian International Islamic University. A university that stands together in a diversity of cultures, languages, history, and also the beliefs inherent in the identity of Indonesia as a multicultural archipelagic country. Indonesian International Islamic University is the first international Islamic university in Indonesia that not only explores Islamic studies, but also introduces to the world an advanced Islamic civilization in Indonesia that is able to make a positive contribution through discovery, research, and global achievement.
Do you need high quality of international education right here in Indonesia? The place is at the Indonesian International Islamic University, or we call it IIIU. IIIU has 4 faculties. One of them is the Faculty of Education. The Faculty of Education offers MA and PhD in education with 4 concentrations. First, curriculum teaching and learning. Second, educational assessment and evaluation. Third, education policy management and leadership. And 4, education and society. The 4 concentrations are designed to represent the ecological system, namely those that focus on the micro context, represented by the concentration of curriculum, teaching and learning, the meso context, represented by the concentration of educational assessment and evaluation, and the concentration of education policy management and leadership, while the concentration of education and society represent the context of a larger meso layer, linking it with the macro lenses of economics, politics, anthropology, and sociology of education.
And here, we are at the Faculty of Education, one of the faculty at IIIU designed to produce high-quality transformative educators with a passion for lifelong learning. Our dedication to excellence and innovation sets us apart from the rest, and we are proud to be leading the way toward a brighter future for education.
The IIIU Faculty of Education offers a Master of Arts in Education program that prepares graduates for careers as academics, practitioners, designers, researchers, government officials, managers, supervisors, assessment specialists, evaluators, policy analysts, and consultants at national and international institutions. The program provides a comprehensive foundation in education covering theories, philosophies, practices, and their connection to society and culture. Graduates are equipped with the skill and knowledge necessary to succeed in education. The IIIU Faculty of Education is committed to providing students with supportive and inclusive community. Our faculty comprises experts dedicated to helping students achieve their academic and professional goals. With resources and support available at IIIU, students have the opportunity to thrive and succeed in their chosen careers in the education sector.
The Faculty of Education is filled with experts and globally recognized lecturers who are able to share their passion, story, journey, and perspective with like-minded students.
Our PhD program is designed for students who are passionate about education and want to make a significant contribution to the field. Our faculty members are experts in their respective areas of research, and our program provides students with the analytical tools and resources they need to conduct groundbreaking research and participate in global discussion. Our application process is highly competitive, but we encourage all qualified students to apply. You can visit our website for more information on the application requirements and deadlines. Let's make your dream come true with study in the PhD program at the Faculty of Education, Universitas Islam Internasional Indonesia.
The Faculty of Education at Indonesian International Islamic University is designed to produce scholars, researchers, and experts in education who understand the scientific foundation of education holistically, with a comparative insight into the philosophy and the practice of Western, Islamic, and Indonesian education. Students at the Faculty of Education are encouraged to explore complex educational problems and come up with innovative solutions.
On more than 140 hectares of land, Indonesian International Islamic University has built dozens of facilities to ensure a seamless experience and also a balance between academic activities and non-academic activities. Indonesian International Islamic University will always support the positive development and freedom of each individual, especially those related to physical, mental, and spiritual development.
One among the reasons to establish this university is how to introduce Indonesia to the world. Indonesia is a very rich country in terms of cultural diversity, religious diversity, and also experiences in developing democracy hand in hand with the Islamic development. Instead of sending study abroad to many foreign countries, now we invite student, lecturer, intellectual come to Indonesia, and this university become an intellectual hub, and I'm sure within a short time Indonesia will get global recognition since we have qualified lecturer, qualified student, and we have a clear plan how to make this university getting international standard.
At IIIU, we will learn more, gain more, and give even more as we believe. Lesson shapes souls. Come and join us to shape the souls and create the future. Welcome to Indonesian International Islamic University. A university that stands together in a diversity of cultures, languages, history, and also the beliefs inherent in the identity of Indonesia as a multicultural archipelagic country. Indonesian International Islamic University is the first international Islamic university in Indonesia that not only explores Islamic studies, but also introduces to the world an advanced Islamic civilization in Indonesia that is able to make a positive contribution through discovery, research, and global achievement.
Do you need high quality of international education right here in Indonesia?
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our Master of Ceremony, Fadia Muksen and Hasnan Yasin. Bismillahirrohmanirrohim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Day 2 of the second annual conference of Faculty of Education 2023 at Indonesian International Islamic University.
Our first and main agenda is a discussion session that will be delivered by our keynote speaker, Dr. Abdullah Sahin from the University of Warwick, United Kingdom.
The session will be moderated by Dr. Lukmanul Hakim, the lecturer of Faculty of Education. Dr. Lukmanul Hakim, the floor and time are yours.
Tes. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I would like to invite Dr. Abdullah Sahin to accompany me in front. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wahlul 'uqdatam min lisani yafqahu qawli. A very good morning, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests and esteemed participants. Welcome to the second Faculty of Education Annual Conference 2023. Big applause, please. Okay. My name is Lukmanul Hakim, and I have the privilege being your moderator for today's session. And first of all, I would like to express my gratitude to our speaker today, Dr. Abdullah Sahin, coming all the way from Warwick University in UK, and also the present for all the audiences today. We gather today here to engage in an insightful and enriching seminar about educational policy and management in the Muslim societies, addressing contemporary issues on administration in education to move forward. I hope today's forum will expand our knowledge and spark discussion. And before we begin, I would like to introduce our speaker for today, Dr. Abdullah Sahin. He has background in Islamic studies, okay, and he was originally trained in Islamic law in the University of Ankara, Turkey, in the Faculty of Divinity. And somehow he ended up as a Muslim educator. Right. How he ended up as a Muslim educator is a very long journey, I believe. Yeah. And to cut it short, what happened was when he first came to the United Kingdom, he witnessed the young generation of British Muslims struggling to make sense of Islam in their life. Okay. And Dr. Sahin wanted to do something about it, and so he switched his passions from Islamic studies and Islamic Sharia to Islamic education and social sciences. And I think that is the right step to do. Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe that we can see someone's thought journey from their writings, isn't it? And we can also see from Dr. Sahin's writings, starting from his bachelor degree thesis to master and also to PhD level. For his bachelor degree thesis, he wrote about exploring the dynamic contextual character of hermeneutics in classical Muslim legal thought, an inquiry into illa hikmah distinction in Islam jurisprudence. That is very much low, yeah. And then for his master degree in University of Birmingham, he wrote about J. Fowler's faith development theory, an Islamic critic. And for his PhD dissertation in the Birmingham University, He wrote about critical dialogical Islamic education, attitudes toward Islam, and the modes of religious subjectivity among British Muslim youth. You see, from the title, he has shifted from law to education. Welcome aboard. Okay. For today's session, Dr. Sahin will discuss about a very interesting topic and a very much relevant to the current situation. The title is Authoritarian Educational Leadership and Modern Islamic Higher Education. Can educational values of prophetic transformation and democratic inclusion be reconciled? And he will try to answer several questions. Like the first question will be like, why does authoritarian leadership dominate contemporary Muslim societies? I think that is a very interesting question because authoritarian leadership is regarding centralized decision-making about emphasizing on discipline and obedience. Is it true? I really want to hear about that one. And the second is, he will try to answer, is there a crisis in leadership and modern Islamic higher education? And the third is, how education, power, and religious authority are imaged in diverse Muslim traditions. The fourth is, what are the challenges of Muslim faith leadership education in the modern world? And the last, prophetic leadership and democratic change, reconnecting the transformative educational values of Islam in the modern world. Ladies and gentlemen, before we begin, I kindly request everyone to keep the mobile phones on silent mode to limit any distractions, and also allowing us to fully immerse ourselves in the discussion ahead. Dr. Sahin, you will have like 40 minutes for presentation, and then we will have like 50 minutes for question and answers. Hopefully, we will wrap our today's discussion by 9:30. Okay, Dr. Sahin, the stage is yours.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi ala din al-Islam wa tawfiq al-Iman wa salatu wa salamu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. First of all, I'm really honored to be called back to join this highly interesting conference, the second annual conference. And I would like to extend my thanks to our Dean, Professor Niran Nurmila, our colleagues at the Faculty of Education, Head of PGT, Professor Tati, and of course all colleagues, and the conference organizer, Professor Bambang, and the rest of the crew. Most importantly, I would like to extend my thanks to our students, who have been a great source of inspiration to encourage me to come back, and I'm really glad to be back. So first, I would like to thank you to Lokman, our moderator. He wonderfully summarized my life story. So thank you, Lokman. You really captured very well the whole journey, crossing the boundaries from classical Islamic sciences to education, discovery of education. Education, you are right, is really the engine of entire scholarship. And I believe it is the engine of this very university we are in, IIIU. Because without an educational vision, no educational activity will survive and achieve its goals. So I'm very pleased and excited to be part of this exciting experiment. And this morning, what I would like to share with you, something goes with the theme of your conference this year, is to collectively reflect and consider character of nature of education and leadership that we have in our educational culture today, and what kind of leadership, education leadership is imagined in diverse Islamic traditions, and if there are transformative features, as Lokman says, how do we actually manage to bring back to guide us today? Oh, select this, right, okay. So I think because we are all coming out of Islamic contexts, different maybe countries, but it is the same broad Islamic culture that actually we came out of it, be it Indonesia, Turkey, or Pakistan, Central Asia. I think there is an assumption we all know from our experience as students, teachers, administrators, we do have an issue with the concept of authoritarian leadership, sadly, not only in education, but in politics, in religious affairs, in all kinds of platforms in life. So because I take this as a kind of heuristic assumption, I think we all agree, the question is why really such a negative situation has arisen? Could we understand the dynamics behind it so it could actually change and address the problem? Then I will look at particularly leadership within the context of Islamic higher education. This has been my really passion the last probably couple of years, 5-6 years. I work with Muslim faith leaders in the UK, and my research really, although came out of Muslim children and young people in Britain, but I gradually moved on to work with educational leaders and faith leaders. So we will try to understand in higher education what kind of leadership, education leadership we should have. That will bring us to clearly look at the core of the culture that we are all part of it. That is Islam, religion, which infuses all of our cultural activities. We may be personally committed or not committed, but Islam informs the cultural practices that we are all part of it. So we will look at notion of knowledge, authority, particularly comes with that, power relations, and how these concepts are framed within religious spiritual heritage of Islam. And then we will move on to look at challenges of faith leadership today. Remember, being a faith leader is one thing, trying to facilitate, bring about young leaders for today is another task. So faith leadership education, what is it? We will ask that question. What kind of leaders do we want to really see developing in our institutions, from our institutions? And that will take us to look at the final question, that is whether in Islam, with all it is charismatic, religious, spiritual, authoritative leadership, could we find out some democratic features? Is it possible? Can we reconcile, religious-based leadership practices with what clearly most of the Muslim societies today need, is the civic democratic leadership. It may be possible, may not be possible, but you will see my, at least, story. And that will bring us to have some conclusions and hopefully some questions and answers. By the way, thank you very much for Fahrul for this wonderful coffee. Special coffee, that's right. My measurement of a good university is whether you can find a good coffee. So you passed the test, Triple IU. This is really good coffee. Okay, now because we have students as well, I think I try to make my address useful to students. Clearly, whenever we reflect on any kind of issue systematically, we are in the realm of methodic thinking. So we have to have some clarity on the methods and the context that guiding my reflections. That is the methodological framework, and the context that I've been using basically is last 10 years of the project I called Rethinking Education in Islam, Islamic Education, and particularly within the context of faith leadership education in Islam, within Muslim majority and minority contexts. So although my journey began in Europe, Muslim minority context, but I worked in Kuwait, Gulf, and I did the same research within that Muslim majority context. And of course, now I'm blessed to work in the largest Muslim majority country, Indonesia. Round of applause. This question is obviously, you could have a conceptual question, but in order to understand and investigate through an evidence-based framework, you got to have an empirical strategy, isn't it? You have to really find out to build up a case based on evidence. So how do we empirically examine these questions? And that brought me the question of looking at the impact of educational cultures on the formation of religiosities and leadership styles. So in Islamic culture, if religion is so crucial, we have to find out how educational activities, informal, formal, shape types of personalities, religiosities, how that in turn frames leadership styles of the learners and the teachers. And that is a very complex story, but I do have a model to share at some point. And of course, you are happy to read later on about the details of this empirical framework. Now, in terms of research, remember, you always assume research is a practical design of a mixed methods, case studies, but you all know we have to also ground our research into a kind of a philosophical framework. You have to have some assumptions about what is knowledge, what counts as authentic knowledge, isn't it? So my own really humble interest has been on particularly phenomenology, which is an interesting concept, philosophy, that has informed social sciences in the West. So I won't go into details of phenomenology, but just let you know that a phenomenology-grounded empirical research has been guiding my research, basically. And most crucially, you could be a very good social science researcher, you could be a very good educational researcher, but unfortunately, if your mode of analysis is not educational, you will not be able to get the results we want. So you could be a sociologist, anthropologist, and you could have excellent research that you produce by observing educational activities. That is fantastic. But the next level, educational analysis of what you found, what does actually tell us the story, is really complex. You got to have an educational analysis framework too. This is crucial because when it comes to Islam and education, this is a major failure, I note from the literature. Most of the people who are involved in these areas of research, really they do not adopt an education analysis. They end up with a theological analysis, a religious moral analysis maybe, but not quite an education analysis. And I will explain what I mean by education analysis. Okay, and finally, every good researcher has to be aware of, isn't it, how he or she is raising these questions. Is an insider, an outsider, isn't it? So we got to look at the insider, outsider, or those who are in between, like myself, for example, and maybe even Professor Saida Shah, maybe, to some extent. Because we come from an Islamic background, we investigate Islamic educational issues, but nevertheless, research requires you to be detached a bit from what you are researching. So what is the question, isn't it, about being insider, outsider, or someone in between? That gray space. Awareness of that is crucial for us. Okay. Now, let's quickly look at the literature. What do we know about these issues? There is plenty of writings on education, Islamic education within Muslim context, within European context. So there is plenty of literature to go. And usually this literature really looks at complex intersecting issues like gender, politics, development, social change, leadership, that frame the discussions on education and Islam Muslims or Islamic education. So people are interested in how gender is functioning in educational context, for example. So this is a crucial theme for exploring this. You've got to have some other dynamics, like religiosity. You can't simply look at gender assuming you are investigating gender in a Muslim society without taking into account how religion informs that dynamic. Okay, and we said that this literature needs to be really evaluated, which I humbly reviewed, actually. I've got a very long review. I'll give you the reference for those who want to look at, kind of a review of current work on Islam education, Islamic education. And we have to ask the questions, who produces this knowledge? Isn't it the researchers behind it? Is it a Western researcher? Is it a Muslim researcher? They do actually impact on the findings and how they look at things. And then, what is the really quality of this kind of literature? We can't simply assume because something is about education in Islam coming from Oxford, it means the best research. No, isn't it? We should really interrogate. We should say, what is this person talking about? Is he or she is aware of what is she or she talking about? So we've got to have an assessment framework of, isn't it, the quality of this kind of education, Islam-related literature. Because often it's assumed, just naively, that this is really interesting and good. So what kind of criteria we would have, this depends on our own assessment, isn't it? That's why we call it critical review. And then we talk about insider and outsider. This is crucial because ultimately we should look at how do we really maintain reflexivity, isn't it? Reflexivity is being able to detach yourself from what you are researching. So if you could do that, the chances are you will authentically express, isn't it, convey what you found from your participants or from your research. So how do we maintain reflexivity in research in Islamic education is a crucial question or skill to develop. Okay. Right, it's coming up. Now, I just want to give a simple example, and you can read the review later on. I mentioned Oxford, not deliberately, but it was my example, actually, with all due respect to our colleagues at Oxford. I think that you're going to be visiting them soon, Professor Nurmila. Part of my review was to look at the very latest projects, and there is Professor Banu at, I think it's Oxford. She has been heading a research project on, particularly, faith leadership education in contemporary Islamic world, which is a very interesting project. And she has published about female Islamic education networks, leadership, lots of really interesting outcome. So when you analyze, you can see, isn't it, our assessment framework. Here we have someone who is very sympathetic to the cause of Islam, and that is informing her entire approach to the problem she's investigating. So, for example, there is no recognition of the fact that she's maybe an anthropologist, a social scientist, but she doesn't really know Islamic theological literacy. There is no acknowledgement. So, without knowing the actual context, really, you come up with very inappropriate analysis framework. So she ends up with identifying problems of current Islamic theological education in Turkey, I don't know, in Morocco, with a very strange framing of Islam as civilization, Islam as theology. Now, it's difficult to explain this concept, but it shows her analysis has never been educational in the first place. Second, she's not familiar with Islamic theological literacy and how Islamic theological education has always been operating, at least within the context of Sunni Islam. So I won't go into details, but I'm asking you to read this literature. It's very interesting. But also read my review of it, see what you think. Have I been fair or unfair? But this is just one example as to why sometimes too much positivity is also a problem in our field. Okay, because, you know, and the other point is she's completely replicating well-known, highly positive voices in the field, non-European, non-Islamic voices, like famous, isn't it, anthropologists, Ekelman, Hafner, Zaman. If you read their literature, it's entirely positive literature. And she's simply replicating their findings, assuming what they say is the final point within the literature on Islamic schooling, Islamic faith leadership education. Really very little critical points are raised. I say this because, for example, somebody like me is a product of classical faith leadership education, but also someone who works with traditional faith leaders at Warwick for 10 years. I know the problems that they're experiencing. None of them are voiced. So clearly there is something wrong. So this is the limitations of utilizing a simplistic social science framework without knowing Islamic literacy, scholarship, or educational analysis, which is the most crucial point. You've got to analyze this stuff educationally. Okay. I think we've gone too much. Now, very briefly, I am in the presence of experts on leadership and education, so I won't claim anything to do with leadership, but all I understand is leadership is usually studied as a political concept because it is to do with the formation of, isn't it, exercise of power, governance within different cultural contexts. And we have, isn't it, famous sociologists within the social theory in the West. We have people like Max Weber, isn't it, his very famous study of how different cultures, what he calls, isn't it, from kind of an evolution from mythic oral cultures, how authority functions, how that moves on to the rational, scientific, literate, so-called cultures. So he makes this division. And then you talk about, isn't it, charismatic leadership, rational, scientific leadership, and bureaucratic, instrumental leadership. So he kind of puts into a developmental trajectory. And the question is, religious, non-literate or oral cultures usually tend to be showing charismatic, non-rational forms of authority and leadership. To what extent is he right is open to question, but we have to be aware of these theoretical frameworks that are actually used in the field. Okay. Right, what's happening? The battery is gone? Oh, it's moving, good, moving. So we also have, isn't it very exciting, what we call not classical social theory like Weber, but very latest post-structuralist theoreticians who were interested in the idea of power, authority, and leadership, how these are all interact. the famous guy, isn't it, is the French post-structuralist, Foucault, Michel Foucault. And you can easily see his framework has informed many of the studies, education studies, to understand leadership and power regimes within a given institution. That could be education, that could be hospital, or psychiatric unit, isn't it? He's very famous of study of madness, how madness is framed within pre-modern cultures. So, because the discourses that run these institutions, also there are power relations. So therefore, isn't it, how these powers are inhibited and they put into practice are crucial. For example, in an Islamic school, how does the school actually signify power relations under the guise of moral, religious values? Yeah. Yesterday we heard a very interesting project, isn't it, from August. So my question was why he didn't look at how these schools interpret their ethos, Islamic ethos. Because it's the Islamic ethos that gives the leaders vision, so-called. And if you analyze their ethos, you will realize what kind of leadership isn't they are aiming at. So you could easily see how Foucault's framework could help us understand how in a school context, the regimes of power are delegated and formed around, isn't it, morality or religion. And of course, I know I'm in Southeast Asia where the concept of adab is very crucial. Adab, isn't it, moral authority. It's a deeply sort of ingrained concept. You can see how it infuses all education and leadership practices. Charismatic, isn't it, religious, spiritual, even political. So we got to look at moral and religious values. How do they actually inform exercise of power within a given institution? Okay. So this is like genealogy and post-structural form. So let's come to our key question, why we have authoritarian, isn't it, leadership models. So by authoritarian, we mean, isn't it, it's a kind of self-justified exercise of power without really channeling through consultation, isn't it, listening or delegating powers. It's simply purely to do with rigid exercise of power exercise, basically. So therefore, authoritarian is sometimes distinguished from authoritative, isn't it? Authoritative would be some sort of a leadership authority that is based on merit or based on knowledge or based on some sort of recognized qualification that actually makes sense. But if you don't have such criteria, it will be quite arbitrary exercise of power just for selfish needs. So we have clearly cultures that are informed by religion. Sometimes this religion is reduced to ritualistic exercises, ritualistic sort of tendencies, and therefore, of course, it creates a problem. Now, we don't have, unfortunately, many examples in the Islamic context. How could we engage with this authoritarianism? Whereas in Europe, in the West, not because we are admiring to the West, but the fact we have to acknowledge, Europe, when came out of fascistic, isn't it, populist fascism of the early 20th century, they set up in Germany, the home of this fascism, basically, isn't it, social scientists, Marxian social scientists, like Adorno, Horkheimer, the home of critical theory, basically. So they come up with the study of how authoritarian personality is formed, right? You have to understand why do people actually form prejudice? What is prejudice, isn't it? You can study this and you can say how we can address this issue and problem. So Europe, isn't it, at that time, managed to address this authoritarian formation. But unfortunately, and this study is really recommended for you to read, the classical study, but in Islamic context, we really don't have much such comprehensive analysis of dynamics informing authoritarian mode of organizing all kinds of leadership, sadly. And that comes from home sometimes, parental authority, teacher, politician. So we have all levels, isn't it, somehow infused with this strange exercise of power. We're not generalizing, but this is a fact, unfortunately. Okay, if you can move. Right, it's coming around. Yeah. So as I mentioned, in our context, we have religiously informed, sadly, authoritarian practices, but that doesn't mean secular modes of authoritarianism are absent. Unfortunately, we have worse secular types of authoritarianism because of the top-to-bottom westernization through military use, isn't it? We are all familiar, Indonesia itself experiences up until 1998. So you are all familiar how a kind of a military-backed westernization could produce secular modes of very authoritarian leadership. One of another key reason is we have to look at Islamic societies. Remember, we said that religion is crucial. Within religion, you know, we heard yesterday the concept of ilm and ulama, isn't it? Knowledge and being knowledge bearer. So the function of these intellectuals were crucial in the classical pre-modern periods. We have no time to look at it in classical Islamic studies, isn't it? We have got books like Ahkam Sultaniyya, the study of political power, political structures. We have Fadail books. These books, they tell us about structure of political leadership. And they all mention somehow the role of the educated, the intellectual, ulama. They usually, within the Sunni world, we have to make an exception to the Shia world because we have some Shia brothers and sisters here as well. Within the Sunni world, unfortunately, I have to be a bit marginalizing because I'm going to talk about the Sunni majority world. So don't take this literally, you know, majority, minority doesn't actually make sense unless you are in it. However, historically, within the Sunni world, ulama or alim, ilm, functioned as a critical arbitration process. So an alim was a knowledge bearer, a moral authority, but what was crucially, office was independent from the government, politicians. So if you look at the entire educational system in the medieval context, that was really one of the key figures as to why knowledge or authority produced civil society in Islam, classical Islam. Because ulama and ilm really were not in the interference of the government, regime, or any other bureaucracy. For example, we had madrasas, the first Islamic higher education institutions in Baghdad, but these institutions, although they are financed through waqf by the ruling elite, but the actual curricula and how you teach, what you teach, was completely left to the scholarly communities. And they could not even produce certificates that are valid. So ijazah wasn't really an institutional exercise of power, because the power lied with the teacher who would be authorizing the knowledge and transmitting that knowledge. Now the key thing is, ulama and alim were really the mediators, the kind of intellectual leaders who remained independent, and they could criticize the government, they could criticize all other actions. Sadly, the demise of these ulama, the intellectual, the public Islamic intellectual, was the biggest problem for the rise of, unfortunately, religiously based authoritarian politics. In fact, even secular politics. So if you look at current context, in places like Turkey, for example, we have a secular, isn't it, constitution, although we have so-called pro-Islamic governments. But the fact is, religion has always been regulated by the bureaucratic state bureaucracy. So therefore, the entire Islamic education is regulated within a state framework. This habit comes from the Ottoman legacy of Enderun, which goes all the way back. Whereas look at in Indonesia, although you have integration with the secular education, but more or less Islamic education operates a little bit independently. So Kiai, for example, has its own authority base because he's acknowledged by the community, the educational leader. So in other words, religion has always been actually managed by the secular state operators. In the pre-modern context, Islamic education wasn't like this. Ulama were independent. So now, the loss of this intellectual leadership meant, sadly, that Islam has become subservient to all kinds of unjust practices. Whereas Islam and knowledge should be acting as liberating, as questioning, at ethics of leadership, ethics of power regulations. But if you don't have independent ulama, this is the result, unfortunately. Okay, so the question is, how do we actually train faith leaders who could function that kind of public intellectual, not a simple religious figure, but also a public intellectual who could actually engage in public affairs and act as a kind of a check and balances with the political power. Okay, so we don't have this. What do we have? We have more or less what the leadership guys tells us, isn't it? Transactional ulama, sadly, or interesting, much more transaction in the bank, probably. Or in Arabic they say, isn't it, mashayikh al-fanadiq? So the sort of leaders of five-star hotels, because they're always hosted in five-star hotels, not like a humble abode we are having in Triple IU now. So, not transformative, transactional, sadly, leadership. And that is the worst kind of faith leadership that you could actually bring about if you want to address the issue of authoritarianism. How much do you have time, Luqman? Oh, under 10 minutes. Okay. So you can read some of these slides. I don't want to really end up going into details. Let's briefly address this issue, leadership in Islam and Islamic education and leadership. What kind of model I propose? Remember, we cannot rethink this education and leadership unless we have a clear idea of what education is. This is the biggest mistake of most of the scholars writing on these issues. Their engagement with Islamic content is really descriptive, not normative, based on normative education analysis. So what I'm going to recommend and suggest first is a bit of analysis of an example of, if you don't think educationally about Islam, you will not make sense of leadership vocabulary properly. For example, we often have references to Khalifa, Imama, isn't it? Ihsan, Taqwa, even democratic sounding concepts like Shura, consultation. Now these concepts are actually read either politically or sometimes in a social scientific jargon descriptively. For example, Khalifa could be understood actually not simply a leader but a steward, somebody who isn't succeeds or who looks after. The idea of administration. So actually it becomes like a servant leader. Whereas in classical Islamic literature, when Khalifa is mentioned, everything to do with the dominance and political leadership. But the concept itself, actually, in the Quranic usage, it donates, signify a much more sense of being, we heard yesterday the concept of amana, and trusted. It's a kind of stewardship, servant sort of leadership model. The concept of, for example, let us say, we've got amana. But amana, in order to be entrusted, something, have a responsibility, but you've got to have power. Actually, amana as most of the classical commentators tell us, is to do with human beings assuming freedom of thinking. Really, amana is not a simple moralizing duty and obedience, is the fact that you have, in the first place, power to exercise. You've got freedom. If you have freedom, then you need to have some sort of sense of trust and responsibility. Ethics comes into it. But you've got to exercise freedom first. Otherwise, what is the point of being responsible if you don't have freedom to choose? Okay, taqwa, for example, God awareness, isn't it? Ihsan, that is highest level of moral realization. But also ihsan means actually, atqana isn't in Arabic. It means to do something in the best way you can. Itqan, it means to come up with the best performance, most beautiful performance. It doesn't always mean high spiritual sort of sense of realizing highly lofty ideals. It's actually, practically, it means you got to be the best in what you do. Yeah? So, we have this, none of these concepts are actually educational read. Now I say, I myself, from my own experience, when I was studying theology, never occurred to me to read these concepts educationally. I always read them in terms of usul al-fiqh and classical Islamic theology. Therefore, of course, I wasn't really grasping what kind of educational universe we have in Islam, or in the Quran and the prophetic Sunnah. We have to look at how education is understood, isn't it, and leadership, how they're integrated. Do we have an educational reading in Islamic heritage that gives us also educational leadership? Now, unfortunately, you cannot do this with ilm and ulama. Remember, the Quran, how much Quran praises knowledge, the Quran also tells you the limitations of the knowledge. Because فَوْقَ كُلِّ ذِي عِلْمٍ عَلِيمٍ, isn't it? There will always be somebody who knows you better. And of course, having knowledge is not enough. You have to embody this knowledge, isn't it? The Quran says, Rabbani, isn't it? This is the connection. The Quran says to the Jewish lawyers, scholars of Torah, Sharia, he says, look, you are having a lot of knowledge, but you are exercising knowledge in the wrong way. So, kunu Rabbaniyin, the Quran says. So clearly, ilm cannot be the ultimate definition of education in Islam. So where do we turn? all of my students know, isn't it? When we exercise, do the conceptual analysis, we end up with a model where the Murabbi model comes from, our key concept. Who can help me? What is our key concept from my students? Yeah, what is it? My goodness, yes. Why do we think tarbiyah is the key concept? Okay, I won't test you now. Remember, isn't it? This is a crucial concept. Again, it's often moralized, highly misunderstood. In Arabic, isn't it? We have this concept. It has three basic roots. Rabba yarbu, rabbiya yarbu, rabba yarubbu. Increase, develop, nurture, care, but most crucially, guide and reform and lead. Aslaha. So really, if education Islam is tarbiyah, it's a learner-led process of facilitating growth into, isn't it, helping the organism to develop, to fulfill their potentials. You all know, isn't it, although this corresponds to a Western theory of education like John Dewey, but actually Muslims have grasped this well before John Dewey. How? We look at, isn't it, 10th century scholar Raghab al-Isfahani, who was teacher of Ghazali, by the way. He gives us a very simple definition. He says, he links to God, actually God having educational qualities. He says, when he comments on the concept of Rabbul Alameen, isn't it, famously, he says, Ar-Rabbu fil asli at-tarbiyah. He says, really, lordship is actually conceived in the Quran as an educational quality. What is education? Then he says, mat tarbiyah. He says, isn't it, insha'u shay'i halan fahalan ila haddi tamam. To organize, facilitate, isn't it, nurture, development of something, an organism, until that organism fulfills, matures these potentials. That's it. How traditionally can get, isn't it? This is 10th century, 9th century, and Imam Ghazali was mostly influenced with this definition, actually. So we've got tarbiyah because it's developmental, it is transformative, and it puts the leadership, educator, first of all, to be able to limit his or her power. He has to listen to be able to guide, to able to facilitate nurture. So otherwise you can't be a leader, isn't it? You will be an authoritarian leader. So that is the connection in Islam, deep connection between education, what it means to be learning and teaching, what it means to be a leader. Every teacher, by definition, every murabbi has to be also a leader. Ready to be able to listen, nourish, care. So the leader is there for the learner, not other way around. Not a charismatic leader wanting to be venerated, shown devotion and respect and all kind of stuff, isn't it? Although these are all good qualities, but essentially we are misunderstanding a learner-led, human-focused mode of leadership to an authoritarian text, teacher, instruction-centered leadership model, which we are all suffering from. Okay, so we come to actually, I will skip most of this if I can. So we do have a theoretical framework, educational framework, where it links education to leadership. Now we have qualities of this tarbiyah model. I won't go into detail, but you can see why, if you reflect more, you realize we do actually have a leadership model that is based, extracted from these core Islamic concepts. And in fact, prophetic leadership, actually, which I'm going to talk next, is part of exercising these qualities of being able to nourish, look after. But of course, first, isn't it, as an education leader, you have to also work on your own self. So the idea of self is developmental. Again, it's a very much Quranic educational concept. So you have to engage with self-cultivation. The best mode would be self-cultivation model. Okay, it's all the way up. Now, you can't see this. I'm now coming the not so good part of my presentation. So far, we have wonderful heritage where education is linked with leadership, and leadership is really geared into facilitating care, listening to the other, giving to the other. It's the other way around, isn't it, today? Complete opposite. However, when we look at how education impacts formation of identities, personalities in Islamic culture today, isn't it, I mentioned that I have an empirical framework. This is called Muslim Subjectivity Interview Schedule. I won't go into details, but we have used this framework to look at how diverse Islamic education contexts produce types of identities and personalities. You all know the story. I think I've shared last year as well. So it's a continuum between, isn't it, a foreclosed identity formation to exploratory formation. So sadly, empirical evidence is telling us we are still nurturing highly foreclosed, inward-looking, agency-lacking type of personality, sadly. This is not self-blame, but this is an empirical finding. One of my students, I'll try to finish with this. Can we click on this internet connection? So one of my students that took up this empirical framework and tried to apply in the context of UK to understand the type of faith leadership produced in Islamic higher education institutions in UK. The paper is there, you can look at this paper. Can we press on that? Can we click on it? Yeah, so this is an interesting actually work. It looks at link between education, formation of attitudes, identity, but also links to the formation of leadership qualities within the context of Islamic higher education. Yeah, it's working? Can we click on it? It's coming up. Right, it's coming up, is it? Good. And that is a kind of really line of research I'd like to see more, because we not only conceptually to rethink what leadership education is in Islam, but we also look at empirically what kind of leadership really we are producing, and why is it that we have this kind of sadly authoritarian, highly hierarchical, non-productive, isn't it, bureaucratic authorities forming, which are really all killing creativity, isn't it? That is the major problem, because in an authoritarian framework, merit will never count. Even if you are thinking, isn't it, it will be actually kill the merit. So therefore, we need to really connect, isn't it, this prophetic Islamic spiritual leadership with its democratic features. And by democracy, I simply mean by the way in which, isn't it, it could go back to the origin of the Murabbi model, where the leader is actually there for serving, not other way around. So if we have the chance to see this on the internet, this paper, I was going to just give you a contrast between types of leadership nurtured within these Islamic higher education institutions, and how that correspond to this model of foreclosed to exploratory continuum of personality formation, if we could resolve this issue. By the way, those who are interested in classical Islamic heritage, isn't it, we have this whole field of Tadbirul Manazil. That means administration, management of household. This literature is classical. You can look into this, those who are interested in management and particularly administration. So there is a very deep Islamic scholarship on management. We wouldn't have time to look into this. The origins of this goes also back to the ancient Greeks. Remember, and my students would know this, probably on the 8th and 9th century, isn't it, with the translation movement in medieval Baghdad, most of this Greek ethics, education, and leadership-related issues translated into Arabic, studied by Muslims. And there's a very famous text, 10th century, called Bryson, isn't it? Management of household. That text, which is a Latin and Greek, it only survives in classical Arabic, has become the model for subsequent Muslim thinkers like Ghazali, when he was trying to understand what is the best way to educate people in the household, like the child. Sadly, the wife, it comes as well. It's a gender problem, because it's modeled on the elite Greco-Roman family life. This is the problem of classical medieval Islamic ethical thinking, sadly. It's all geared into the Greek educational framework. I have no time to explain because we have really great link to show this. So the medieval Muslim thinkers assumed life really just like ancient elite Greco-Roman household. And this Bryson's text informed, and it has 3 parts. The man who is in charge, child, which is always assumed to be a boy, not a girl, and then of course the wife, and finally the slave. How do you manage this in your household? You will be amazed to see most of this moralizing, highly authoritarian framework express people like luminaries like Ghazali, sadly. Okay, if you just scroll down, please. I can't go down. Could you scroll down? Oh, good. Okay, excellent. Working. Fantastic. Noman, well done. Applause for Noman. Okay, if you can go fine. One more. No? One more. Two more. Okay, we just, yes, that's it. You can see he summarized the leadership models. For example, the gatekeeper model, okay? Authoritarian, high boundary making. And then you got conductor, isn't it? Somebody who is kind of in a transactional mode of leadership. And finally, is the cultivator. Someone who actually nourishes and facilitates. This is the summary of the types of, isn't it, leadership, which is kind of transformational. So he took the cultivator with the Murabbi model. And then he tried to use my subjectivity interview schedule to see to what extent Islamic higher education institutions are producing cultivator Murabbi models or not. So the result is obviously, sadly, is a bit, okay, let's get, so he had some 4 in-depth interviews. Oh no, we got too much. Go back. Okay, right. So most of the interviewees, or those who have been interviewed, they fell onto really the kind of the first gatekeeper model, particularly male leadership models, which are foreclosed, different types of foreclosed leadership model. And there were 2 females who showed exploratory, some sort of cultivator mode of leadership. These are participants who are reflecting on their own leadership education. They spend 4 or 5, 6 years in a seminary, and then they come out of this, they become teachers or leaders in a mosque or a madrasa, running a madrasa. And then they saw their own style of leadership, education leadership, sadly shaped by this experience at the seminary or Darul Uloom. Now, we don't have time to carry on further. Yes, so what is the final message? If I just go back to my slide, and I leave you with my final message. Let me see. We didn't talk about leadership and democracy. In the West, this is not an accident. There is an educational link between why democracy first flourished in 5th century BC in Athens. That was mainly to do with discovery of education and teaching. But we don't have time to examine that. So the point is, without an education infrastructure, you cannot really facilitate democratic transition. Education is the key. Just like in the ancient Greek culture, education was the key and teachers. So today we need to produce, isn't it, this Murabbi type, facilitating type educational leaders. So if I come to my final slide, and I leave that, hopefully, you don't have to put up with me anymore. Is it moving? Okay, good. We have no time for these interesting slides. I spent all of my night last night preparing. That means I'm not a good presenter, I suppose. Okay, we don't want to discipline ta'deeb. This is all very interesting dimensions of our discussion, and the Greek connection. Our dear friend Ghazali, Imam Ghazali. Okay, now what really I want to see is this Tarbiyah Murabbi model reconnecting with the imaginative, prophetic education and leadership. I believe this is what Islamic world needs. What do I mean by that? I don't mean simple inward-looking, mystical, charismatic leadership. No, this is not the point. We need really outward-focused, transformative, prophetic leadership. If you are at that level, you already have worked out your own internal development, self-cultivation. So, what is this leader is capable of doing? Developing capacity to concretely perceive, understand what is before us. We need leaders who understand today, first of all. If you don't understand the problems we are in, isn't it, you will never address anything. If you are part of the problem, how could you address it? We need receptive, perceiving leaders who are able to understand the context we are in. Today, this means learning social science. Today, this means learning Islamic heritage. Today, it means openly understanding the crisis facing us. So the first act of this Murabbi transformative prophetic leader to understand what reality is before us, and then with the hope of transforming into the better. What could be future like? So in other words, we have to tap into the power of not yet. Yeah, we don't have to close ourselves in this crisis, end of the world. Humans can transcend, but we have to bring this prophetic insight. And remember, all prophets, including Muhammad ﷺ, came out of margins of not only their own society, but also globally. Arabia was at the margins of Roman and the Persian Empire. Muhammad ﷺ's prophetic personality crossed the lines in order to bring about a new message of peace to a world that was killing one another, sectarian, warfare-ridden. And the prophetic leaders are able to complete their personal transformation, isn't it? Self-cultivation, but they're always there for the others. Therefore, Muhammad ﷺ, isn't it, once he received the revelation in Mount Hira, he never went back to Mount Hira, as far as we know. He was always with people, because his main idea was welfare of his people, to change for the better. So I hope, and there are different prophetic styles, you know. Not all leaders are really perfect. Even the prophets. Look at Yunus alayhi salam, look at Musa alayhi salam, isn't it? Prophet is not somebody, leader is not a perfect leader, not a mystical sort of charismatic, somebody reading the future. Prophet is somebody who's able to reimagine a new future. And I hope that IIIU is going to facilitate leaders that are able to not only understand our calamities today, but have inspiration, confidence, and courage to shape a new Islamic future. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sahin. I really enjoy listening to you, but I'm sorry I have to cut the time. Okay, now it's the time for question and answers. Okay, please raise your hand. Okay, Shifa, and then Maruf, and then Dian. Okay, please somebody hand over the microphone to Shifa first.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you, Pak Lukman. Actually, I was waiting for your explanation about what is meant by educational analysis and how to perform a good educational analysis. I was waiting for this. Thank you.
Okay, next Maruf.
Yeah, thank you so much, Professor Sain. Just introducing myself to everyone. My name is Maruf Aman, pursuing MA Education at UIII, and I'm from Pakistan. So it seems that you were able to, in your early stages of life, you were able to find that gap in the Islamic education, and then you practically, not only theoretically, you practically tried to fulfill that gap by providing your own model of tarbiyah and other research that you've done. So in your contribution to Islamic education and Islamic literature, what I would like to know is, has ever this idea come across your mind that there is, like, you were able to find gap from the perspective of education in Islam, and then you try to fulfill that? Has ever this idea come across your mind that if there was another Sahin and he could have fulfilled, he could have analyzed Islam in another perspective, maybe through the constitutions of the countries of all around the world, like some people have done it through science. They have started trying to connect science and Islam, and you have done it, education in Islam. Maybe there was another Professor Sain who could have analyzed Islam in another aspect of knowledge around the world. This is what I would like to know. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Maruf. Please, Dian, on the back, Mas.
Thank you for the opportunity. You really caught my attention, Dr. Sahin, when you mentioned about the transformative or transformational leadership, because personally, I take that word is quite heavy. It's about empowering others, nurturing others, caring for others, creating other leaders when you are the leader. But when it comes to transformative, I think it's really difficult if you are not the individual who have certain elements or certain characteristics. If it's too much, it's going to be charismatic, which based on your methodology approaches, we have several cases in Indonesia, and they're not really that good. The cases are quite negative. But if it's lack of confidence or courage, let's say, it's gonna be probably the lesson learned we got from the Yunus alayhi salam, which is lack of confidence. So my question is, how do we actually apply the real practice of to be just like the right amount individual to be that transformative leader? Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Please.
Thank you. Very interesting and good questions. And you've been listening. I thought probably you are all having second, third siesta, or not, what's called the sleep. In your dreams, you are following me. So really good questions. I'm very pleased to see you are capturing some of the key points. The first thing is education analysis. You are absolutely crucial to my whole approach. If you don't understand education analysis, none of this will make sense. And we are in a faculty of education. We are really aiming to give you, isn't it, competence to engage educationally with issues that you're analyzing. Now, what is meant by educational analysis? You have to, isn't it, unpack the concept of education. So how learning, teaching, being a teacher, being a learner, what kind of knowledge, isn't it, should be privileged, taught, everything to do with that process of learning, teaching, that could be values, could be knowledge, are really components of, isn't it, what we call education analysis. And that begins with unpacking the key concepts for ourselves. So if you are a teacher, if a Muslim teacher, the expectation is if you are delivering education in the name of Islam, you should unpack what is really education in Islam. If you don't do that, isn't it, the chances are you will have some preconceived notions of education and being an educator. You will simply unconsciously practice that. And this really technically comes from mostly, I would say, analytical philosophy. And it's not simply unique to Europe, by the way. Classical Islamic scholars call this, isn't it, ilm al-hudud. That means being able to analyze concepts properly first in order to be able to actually understand them. So that exercise of understanding the universe, educational universe, analyzing how learning and teaching are imagined in a given cultural context, which begins with analyzing vocabulary, but also practices and policy, it's a key method which has been often really not used. Now I say this, in Europe, this has been kind of reclaimed because educational philosophers had to do this. Otherwise, when with the secular education we had problems of, how do we teach religion in a curriculum? So previously, everything was based on church, right? There is no question answered. In a secular context, the question was, how do we organize a curriculum and how we teach? If you teach religion, can it be taught like history or science? If not, how? Can we transcend the confessional approach? So that meant really people going back. Maybe some people said there is no place for religion in curriculum, like in France, for example. So these philosophers went back and asked questions. Okay, what is meant really by education? What is the aims of education? What kind of different value systems we have? And that analytical engagement gave us a wonderful, really, educational method that we should all, I think, as researchers in the field of education, should really appreciate first, no matter what we are observing. So it begins with this level of analysis. So if you look at in Islamic context, Islam, Quran, Islamic tradition is heavily geared towards law, Islamic law. So we don't understand, we actually turned religion into a law framework. And that is the biggest, really, injustice we can do to Islamic universe. Because education is a most comprehensive vision, which includes law, which includes ethics, morality, philosophy. However, if you don't grasp, actually the Quranic logic is based on a transformative education, you will really suffocate Islam with legal framing. And that was, I didn't know, in fact, and the second question from Maruf, which is a good point. So when I switched, isn't it, my context from Turkey to Birmingham, and I was supposed to be doing Islamic law-related PhD at Birmingham, but I realized it's completely futile, really, because the communities I was encountering, they were really struggling to teach basic Islam to kids in the madrasa and the mosque. So I realized it's a really futile time to discuss about the fine details of Islamic law. And the question was, what kind of educational culture was there to actually communicate Islamic knowledge and values properly? Because I realized quickly the growing gap, intergenerational gap between the parent, the first generation, the leadership at the mosque and madrasa, and of course, in newly developing generations. This is where I need to really look at problematize education. And education is a very sensitive area. You can't simply go into it because education is part of who you are, your identity. For this, you have to build an empirical case. This is what I did, and I was lucky at Birmingham School of Education. They gave me that opportunity. And building up, discovering education as a social science, looking at, of course, the foundations of education, like psychology was the key in my case, you realize how learning and teaching shapes implicitly who you are. And you can actually analyze this process properly, what kind of development it takes into it. So for me, that was the key point, to reread Islam within an educational framework. And I have a paper on this, isn't it? I call it Thinking Islam Educationally and Education Islamically. Now, some people do this with science, with maths. I think they are on the wrong side, Maruf. I know there are scientific miracles, science is everywhere. Science outcome is one thing, scientific thinking is another thing. Okay? Of course, Muslims are rushing to say we have divine word, has all the truth in it, so all scientific discoveries should be approved by the Quran. This is very sentimental. They don't understand scientific logic. Because how about evolution, isn't it? We've got a big contradiction now. Scientific activity is a human activity. It's good to be thinking scientifically, which we need to inculcate in Islamic education, but we should understand science is a human activity. And Quran is not meant to be a science book or a maths book, despite people who are claiming that. There is no way you can look at it. Quran is a transformative miracle, really educational miracle that changes people. Hidayah, that is what it makes sense. If you read Hidayah educationally, it makes sense. But if you read simply spiritually, it will keep you sleeping, sadly. Right? So, with all due respect to those who are using Islam and science, I think they're on the wrong track. We have to reconnect with Quranic, dynamic, transformative education. Diane, what I mean by transformative, you are absolutely right. Nobody could become transformative overnight. So first we have to unpack the concept, isn't it? Educational analysis. Remember, we have the word formation and transformation. We are formed, isn't it, with all forces around us. When you are formed only, sadly, you could be a product of instruction, even sometimes indoctrination, social powers. How could you become transformative? It has nothing to do with increasing knowledge, having a lot of information. It's having agency, a learning agency, of being able to, isn't it, act upon what you receive, what you learn. So self-cultivation, that is the key. How do we get young leaders to be able to self-cultivate, to gain agency, to, isn't it, act on, reflectively, what they are learning? If they do that, gradually, isn't it, the way they perceive the world will change. So transformation is being able to be ready, courageous, to take risk of changing not only the content, or also the very form, the way in which you perceive reality. Now, this is difficult to say, and therefore transformative leadership is most difficult to achieve, because it requires readiness, isn't it, to go all the way through to this risk-taking process of being able to change for the better. You, of course, have to have an ethics guiding you, values guiding you, but just to distinguish between formation and transformation. Not increase knowledge, but being able to work out the knowledge to transform the very form in which you perceive reality. And I would say most of this is not really cognitive, by the way. It's nothing to do with a lot of knowledge. We now know from the psychological studies, 90% of learning, real learning, is non-cognitive. It is based on emotional, motivational framework. So I didn't have time to explain that. One thing we miss in our leadership education, there is no space for emotional maturity. It is a desire. Remember, famous Aristotle said, human beings by nature desire to know, which is the Islamic, isn't it, attitude as well. So how do you mobilize the desire is the key figure, this emotional capital building, not always social or cognitive capital building. Now, I come back to the final point, if you don't allow me. All of these how is going to translate into a modern Islamic faith leadership education. For example, in Indonesia, you have, as I always believe, one of the best really integrated models of traditional Islamic education with Western secular education. There are problems, of course. But if you look at higher education, the problem of, in a sense, the negative thing or the challenge out of this is faith leadership, if it is too closely monitored as a professional kind of certified practice, then unfortunately the problem is it loses its community embedded nature. Remember, you know, we visited a Pasantren, isn't it, 2 days ago? Wonderful. Salsabila's Pasantren. Where is Salsabila? Oh, she's there. Fantastic. You turn out. You see, the best education is when you see a learner turning out to listen to you again. Because best education is learning to turn your soul around. Salsabila, thank you for coming. We visited her Pasantren. Isn't it, you realized, when I asked the question to Kiai, I said, what is the purpose of your education? He said, we want to develop leaders in the community. He didn't say to become engineers, scientists, and this and that. He said, we want community leaders, okay? But the next question was, can we make all these 7,000 people community leaders? Difficult, isn't it? So in our system, we're not selective of distinguishing between who is going to be a leader, who is going to actually pursue a different path. But that comes into a conflict. If you regulate leadership education, that is a theological education, the question is, how do we bring about some sort of quality assurance? This is on one side, it's very good, accountability, but on the other side, how really this new certified leadership could actually be recognized by the people. In other words, can you actually get the educational leaders to be qualified? For example, Kiai to apply for a certificate. It is very difficult to ask that because it's an organically developed process of becoming a leader. So we have, isn't it, highly big challenges facing us in order to bring about this transformative leadership. And one area we have to look at how this theological core of leadership education can be reframed. And the only danger is we don't want to make it bureaucratic because then one ministry wants to control X, one movement, I don't know, wants to control X. That is really dangerous. This is an educational task for educators. So I expect, for example, from Faculty of Education to really look into this as a research area, to look at how could we get some sort of check and balances in terms of traditional faith leadership education in Indonesia, bearing in mind these challenges ahead of us. But above all else, all education, isn't it, is really transformational, coming back to Dayan, if it inspires, mobilizes, turns our soul around. If it doesn't do that, it is not a good education, not a leadership education. And I hope, as Muslim educators, we're able to go back to this Murabbi framework and realize our task and duty. Don't ignore our own needs as human beings, our vulnerabilities, but be able to ready to change ourselves and be able to be facilitating other people's positive change. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين.
Thank you. We still have time. Yes. Anybody? Okay, Ibu Sri. And then? Yes. The next question is from Ibu Sri. She's one of our scholar in residence. Okay, Bu Sri, please.
Yeah, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Sri Widyastri. I'm a guest lecturer here. Thank you so much for your explanation, Dr. Abdullah Sahin. I discuss about this topic is so big in Islamic education, right? So the point is, my point, how the ideal concept, educational policy and management based on Al-Quran and Hadith. Just this. Thank you so much.
Okay, simple answer is, we have to revisit our understanding of what education is in Islam. If you don't do that, you will end up, isn't it, theologizing. You will use a lot of vocabulary, theological vocabulary. It will not be educationally utilized. So we don't have time. If you are you here for a year? Oh, it's only 1 semester.
3 months.
What? You are 3 months. You are more than welcome to join our luminary students on Islamic education class and see how we go through this over a period of a whole semester. It is not easy to answer. Really, you have to be ready to rethink the entire vocabulary of education in Islam. I think this is the biggest issue within the literature on Islamic education. And if you do that, you will realize actually Islam does have management, leadership, transformative educational vocabulary, because the Quran by very definition, changed one person, Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, prophetic education, and in turn, an entire society was reborn. This is only possible if you have a transformative education. Don't be fooled by the jargon of today. Look at the results. How did the Quran facilitate positive change? And I think it wasn't moralizing, it wasn't instruction, it wasn't simply brainwashing. It was other way around. It was empowering the learner to take risk. It was empowering the learner to their agency. The Quran uses critical thinking as it is pedagogy of intervention. This vocabulary is very polluted with the modern ideas. But really, if you listen to the Quran, this is what education sciences help you to understand the Quran. The more you read education sciences, the better you understand Quranic transformative education. You've got to have a method. So you realize we are misreading education in Islamic heritage. Therefore, Islamic education is crucial to any kind of, I would say, higher education framework. In fact, we might propose to make Islamic education a cross-faculty subject. Professor Nina, what do you think? We might have some hope from our Mawlanas in Islamic studies. They could join us. Just an idea. Okay, thank you.
Okay, we still have time, please.
Assalamu alaikum, Doctor. I remember since your last visit to Indonesia, you were mentioning about their education system here. And you said the Indonesia got one of the best Islamic education within the Indonesia. So as you are supervising many PhDs in UK, British education system, Madaris and Darul Uloom, and also you are really educating the educators in UK. So my question, what is your finding or differences between Indonesian Madaris, like you visited a residential madrasa day before, and Madaris or Darul Uloom in United Kingdom? What is your finding? This is my question. Thank you. Jazakallah khair.
Jazakallah, Sheikh Mahmoud. Yes, very good question. I think we need to link Madaris in Britain more and more with Pasantrans in Indonesia, definitely. Thank you for the question. First of all, really my major, sort of hope, dream academically has always been to integrate Islamic education with the conventional education studies framework. Remember, Islamic education, sadly, always is studied in part of Islamic studies or theology. This is not the right way. So I was, alhamdulillah, lucky within the British higher education context. We developed the first Islamic education program within existing MA master's program in School of Education at University of Warwick. So what I call for is formation of Islamic education studies as a distinctive scientific discourse. Because Islamic education studies has a professional development focus, research, and of course, most crucially, training and policy development. And we are lucky, at least we managed to take the first step really at Warwick, set up this with the community's help, by the way. You cannot do this without community's help. And then you can actually reach out to Darul Uloom's Madaris. Here, we have a big problem because in Indonesia, you have a very, mashallah, confident culture, easygoing, life is nice, lots of papaya, mango around. But in Britain, it's very cold climate. Everybody's very, inward looking. And imagine you are a minority. Your parents or grandparents came to work in the UK. They have no particularly religious literacy, very devout people, set up mosques and madrasas. And the next generation of young people are growing up within that sense of being a minority, sadly. That's a big challenge, big difference. So you understand, of course, the madaris are crucial to retain heritage. But the danger is, as the generations change, Islamic education is reduced to instruction, a simplistic retention of heritage. This is not good. So the idea is, can we make Islamic education to preserve culture, but give confidence to young Muslims to be able to reflect, think with their faith within the new context? This is the task of Islamic education studies. We have to educate, train our teachers in madaris. Look at our madaris. 500,000 young children attend madaris. Very few exceptions where we have a qualified teacher guiding what is happening there. So nothing changes. 3 generations, everything is the same. So I'm very pleased that we've set up these Islamic education studies at Warwick, which are working with partners on the ground, Madaris, Darul Ulooms, Faith Leadership, for example, all isolated. You know, the gatekeeper model, that research was carried out with British, actually, Muslim seminaries. Result is, they're isolating themselves. This kind of leadership, isn't it, cannot really work. It cannot respond to the changing needs of young people. So Islamic education studies has to come up as a new respected field where Islamic knowledge is crucial as social science and educational knowledge. Without this kind of crossing the boundaries, we can't really not only retrieve the rich educational heritage in Islam, but also we cannot really educate and train our next generations. Indonesia has a lot to offer in this sense because, as I say, its own history is quite relatively recent. The democratic transition created opportunities for Islamic education to work with secular education. So we have, isn't it, purely traditional pesantren, we have modern madrasa, we have all kinds of, isn't it, types of Islamic schooling trying to really integrate itself with the wider system. Now, this has never been experimented in different parts of the Islamic world. Look at Turkey, completely secularized, actually. Look at, of course, Gulf. It's another big story. I used to work in Kuwait. Lots of material gain, but unfortunately, the education infrastructure is simply borrowed from the West. It's a very bad imitation of Western models. Therefore, no educational creativity. I think Indonesia, with all its challenges, let's be fair, it has challenges, it has some sort of civic democratic engagement. There are, of course, dangers in that because, you know, somehow Islamic education could fall back into instruction, indoctrinating mode, sadly. Because the more power given to transnational religious networks, unfortunately, the more they will control the resources and the power. And you all know the context, isn't it? We have very big movements from Nahdlatul Ulama, Nahdlatul Watan, isn't it, Muhammadiyah, I don't know, Salafi groups. So this is the kind of danger. What has not happened in Indonesia is to develop new theoretical, practical approaches to Islamic education. And this is where maybe we all need to collaborate. So therefore, I am really pleased and lucky that IIIU actually gave space for Islamic education. It recognized as an Islamic institution, it should have its own educational vision Islamically. Without this, it will not work. It will be another imitation of the Western universities, which we have millions around. You know, Gulf is full of, I don't know, American University of Kuwait, American University of Sharjah. You go to the place, there's nothing to do with the culture that you are visiting. Everything is artificial. How could you produce young generations? So we have to go back and be honest. I think Indonesia gave us that civic opportunity of Islamic education reinventing itself. There are not yet models, but clearly there are some cross developments. And it's unlike, for example, our other neighbor, Malaysia, where sadly 4 decades of Islamization was experimented. So I would say this is really, and research is actually substantiating this, Indonesia is in a better place than Malaysia in this sense. Because in Indonesia, religion became part of politics, regime really. And that is a danger. Islam, as we said, alim and ulama have to be independent. They cannot be simply trained and then certified with a higher power, sadly. So, coming back to the point, we need a global Islamic education studies network where we have researchers, where we have religious knowledge people, practitioners, learners, parents could freely exchange without any agenda. This is the problem of Islamic education. The minute you talk about Islamic education, everybody has a preconceived ideology already. So therefore, isn't it, we need liberal, i.e. it means a free, higher education where we could debate, discuss all of these possibilities without giving people answers. And I think, therefore, the home of innovative Islamic higher education, therefore, in my humble opinion, is IIIU, where without any inhibition, you can talk all about this. I couldn't speak like this in any other Islamic higher education institution, sadly, including my hometown, home country, Turkey. So the critical point is we have to make Islamic education studies as a respected field of research, scholarly work, policy development. I hope this answers your question, Mahmoud.
Thank you, Dr. Sahin. Listening to Dr. Sahin's presentation is truly thought-provoking because it gives us a lot of ideas, issues to resolve. You invite us to reread the Islamic educational framework. That is truly amazing. Yeah, you're right. And I hope that you will write a book regarding Islam education in Indonesia. No, I mean regarding Indonesian, yeah, of course. You'll be the expert of Islamic education in Indonesia. Okay, maybe we'll collaborate together. Okay, inshallah. Okay, the time is up, Dr. Sahin. I think thank you once again for your thought-provoking presentation. I also want to thank you all for joining us today for this insightful seminar. Thank you for your active participation and enthusiasm throughout the seminars. Your presence and engagement have truly made this event successful. And please stay connected with us for our next third Faculty of Education Annual Conference 2024. Inshallah, we look forward to seeing you again. Thank you and have a wonderful day. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you very much for the insightful discussion that has added to our knowledge.
Indonesian International Islamic University has a special gift and souvenir for Dr. Abdullah Sahin, and we kindly request Professor Nina Nurmila, the Dean of the Faculty of Education, to give the gift of and souvenir to our keynote speaker. After this, we will have photo session together, so please don't leave first. Okay, please give applause to Dr. Abdullah Sahin, our keynote speaker from University of Warwick, United Kingdom. And we would like to invite all of the lecturers to come to the stage for taking the pictures together. Okay, please. Nggak apa-apa. Can you come to the front seat, all of you, the audiences? So please feel the front seat first. I'm here. Aku aja pengen foto. Ya sebentar nggak kelihatan dibilang. Itu loh di belakang yang paling pojok. Iya, iya, iya. Okay, everyone, please smile.
Now we have completed the main sessions of our agenda for today. And the next agenda is the panel presentation. We would like to inform all the audiences that we're going to have a panel presentation at the lecture hall and the teleconference room of the Faculty A. And we would also like to inform you that the lunch will be provided in the panel sessions. And after the prior and lunch break, we will have another panel presentations at this theater, and we will also have a closing ceremony. So make sure you're here in the closing ceremony this evening.
Yes, we would happy to see you again at the panel presentations and closing ceremony at the theater hall this afternoon. Okay, thank you so much, and wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.